In this lesson, we're going to be integrating SQLAlchemy, which is a database ORM, and creating our first model. ORMs, or Object Relational Mapping, is a technique that lets you query and work with databases using object-oriented programming. The benefit of this is that you get to work with databases at the programmatic level instead of using raw SQL queries. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is install the Flask SQLAlchemy package. So we'll go to our shell, and make sure that your virtual environment is activated. In our reminders directory, we're going to go pip install, and it is flask-SQLAlchemy. So you can see there it's installing, and there we go. Now the next step that we need to take is we need to add the Flask SQLAlchemy extension to our application. So we'll switch over to our text editor, and we'll open the extensions.py file that we created a while back. Now, inside the file is where we're going to define our SQLAlchemy extension. So the first thing that we need to do is import the SQLAlchemy class. So we'll go from flask-SQLAlchemy import, and we want to go SQLAlchemy. There we go. And we want to go down 2 lines. Oh, actually I have a mistake there. This is an underscore, not a dash. There we go. So now we want to go down 2 lines, and we want to define a variable. And for that variable, we want to instantiate a SQLAlchemy object. So we'll go take the class, and we'll call it like that. And that's it for the extension. It's very simple. And what we'll do is we'll switch over to our init file. And this is where we're going to register the extension. Now, if you remember, previously we created the register extension function, which we're then calling in our create app function. So what we're going to do is we're going to import the extension that we just created, and then we're going to register it with our app. So we'll go, 1 second, there we go. So we'll go do an import. We'll go from extensions import db, and then we're going to go to our register extensions, and we're going to go, we'll get rid of this old return, and then we'll go db init app. So we'll hit save on that. So what we've done is we've imported our extension from our extensions file, and then we've done an init app method call from that db instance, and fed it the application object. And then this register extensions function is called when the app is created and pass the app object. So in doing this, we've registered the SQLAlchemy extension with our application, and it can now be used in the application context. Now, while we're in the init file, I'd like to take the time to register our Python shell with our Flask application context. So what we'll do is we'll go down to our register shell function that we created previously. We'll get rid of this old return, and then we're going to go inside this function. We're going to define a subfunction, and we'll call it shell context. And then this is going to return any objects that we want available within our Python shell for our application. So the only one that we're going to return right now is db, and that's going to be equal to our SQLAlchemy database extension. So we'll go down 1 line and then back, and then we're going to go app.shell_context_processor. And we're going to pass 1 parameter, which is the shell context function. So just briefly, what we're doing here is we're registering a shell context for the Python shell. And what that means is when we work within a Python shell, we want to give that shell access to our application context, and within that context we want to pass it some parameters. At this point we only have 1 that we want to pass it, but later we're going to want to pass it more. So basically when we work within our Python shell, we want to have access to our database object. So we'll save out of the init file, and we'll open our settings.py file. And now we need to add a setting that indicates the database that we want to use for our SQLAlchemy ORM. So in our base configuration class, we're going to add two new settings. We're going to add SQLAlchemy database URI, and we're going to set that equal to an environment variable, get, and we'll call it reminders db. And then we'll create another one called SQLAlchemy track modifications, and we'll set that to false. So SQLAlchemy database URI is going to be our database connection string, and SQLAlchemy track modifications is a setting within SQLAlchemy that we don't currently need. So next we need to set these environment variables the same way that we've been setting all of our other environment variables. So we'll switch over to our shell, and now we're going to add our environment variable to our activate script. So we'll go echo export reminders db. We'll set that to SQLite --tmp dev.db. And we'll close up all our quotes, and then we're going to add that to our environment reminders bin and our activate. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to reactivate env reminders bin activate, and then we'll echo it out just to make sure that it's set properly. And I'll just, there we go. Okay, so it looks like it's set properly. So basically what we've done is we've set an environment variable for our SQLAlchemy database URI. And what we've done is we set it to SQLite, the temp folder, and we called it dev.db. For this project, we're going to be using SQLite as our database. The project is not very big. It doesn't really require a full-fledged database like Postgres or MySQL. So I think we'll keep it nice and small, and we'll just use SQLite. So while we're in our shell, let's check that our Python shell is working within the application context that we set. So to start a shell for Flask, instead of just going Python, you run the command flask shell, and you see that it started a Python shell for us with this particular notation, which is indicating that our app is included. So if you went app, you can see the application object is included. And if you see, if we print out DB, you'll see that our database extension that we passed within that context is also available within this Python shell. So being able to work in a shell like this is really a valuable tool, and it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy creating applications with Python. If you need to do some work on your database or make some changes, you can just fire up the shell with Flask shell and import your models in the shell context, and then you can work with those models in the ORM and make any type of changes that you want. So next we're going to create a database model. So let's switch over to our text editor, and we're going to create a new file. So we'll go into our application directory, and we want to create a new file, and we'll call it models.py. Now inside the file, the first thing we need to do is we need to import our database extension. So we're going to go from this module extensions import db. So then we're going to go down 2 lines, and we're going to define our first model. Now our application is based around creating scheduled reminders, so we need a model to represent our reminders. So we'll go class reminder, and this class is going to inherit db.model, which is the base model class from SQLAlchemy. So when working with an ORM, your model class is equal to a database table, and then within the class you're going to define variables, and those variables will be equal to columns within that table. So on that note, we need to create some database columns for our model. So the first one that we need to create is a primary key. So we'll go ID is equal to db.column, db.integer, primary key is equal to true. And then we're going to create a message column, and we'll set that equal to db column db.string this time, with a character limit of 160. We'll set nullable to false. Then we want to create send on, which is db column db.date time, nullable also false. And then we want sent on is equal to db column db date time as well. Okay, so what we've done is we've assigned 4 columns to our model, starting with ID, which is our primary key, which is a way of identifying each reminder. This value will be unique, which is tied in with the primary key. For message, we want to be able to store strings up to 160 characters, because after 160 characters, text messages start getting broken into multiple text messages, and we'd like to keep it just kind of in the reign of having 1 reminder, 1 text message. And we set nullable to false because we don't want to have any reminders that don't have messages, because that doesn't make any sense. So we have these 2, send on and sent on. So send on is when we want our reminder to be sent to our phone. So this will be a date time, and we also want this to be nullable false, because we don't want to have reminders that don't have any scheduled date for them to be sent out. And then sent on is a field that we'll use to indicate that a reminder has already been sent. And obviously this needs to be nullable, because reminders that haven't been sent yet, this field isn't going to be set yet. So next, let's switch over to our init file. So what we need to do here is we need to import our reminders model, and then we need to add it to our shell context. So we'll go from .models import reminder, and then we want to go down to our shell context, and we want to add reminder equal to reminder. Okay, so now we want to switch over to our shell. In our shell, if you haven't exited out of the previous Flask shell that we had, you should exit out of that with Control D. I'm going to create a new one now, which will load in the new context. So we'll go Flask shell. There we go, and let's check that it included our reminders model. So let's go reminder. Okay, so it looks like it created it included the reminder model in our shell. So next we need to create the table for our reminder model. To do this, we'll use the command db create all. So this will just create all the tables for the models that have been loaded in this application context. Now we only have one, so it'll just create the reminders table. So let's test that this is working. So we'll create our very first reminders object. So we'll go reminder is equal to reminder. Actually, wait. Let me do an import first. So let's go import, because we need to work with date times here. So we'll go import date time. So okay, now let's go reminder is equal to reminder. So we need to pass a couple parameters to it. One is the message, so we'll go with trusty old hello world. And then the other parameter that we need to set is the send on parameter, which is going to tell it when it should be sent. So for now, we're just going to go date time now, because we don't really care when it sends, we just want to create it. Okay, so it looks like it made the reminder object. So right now it's just a Python object. It doesn't exist within our database. So what we want to do is we want to commit it to our database to make sure everything's working. So we'll go db session add reminder. So this will add the reminder to the database session, and then we want to commit our database session. Okay, so it looks like it worked. There was no errors, which means likely the data has been moved to the database and saved there. So to test this, we'll just query the reminders table and see what we get back. So to do that, you can use your model. So we'll go reminder query all. And you can see there's two objects. This is because I created one previously, but you can see that obviously the reminder objects are being created, added to the table, and then we're able to return them in a query when we query the database. So we've created our very first SQLAlchemy model, and we've set up SQLAlchemy within our Flask application. So all that's left now is to commit our progress. So I will Control D out of the Python shell, and let's go git status to see where we're at. So you can see all the changes that we've made, and we want to add them all. So we'll go git add -a dot, and then we'll go git status to make sure everything's staged appropriately. Looks good. And then we want to go git commit, and the message will be added reminder model and integrated SQLAlchemy. There we go. Perfect commit message. Okay. So that's the end of this lesson. In our next lesson, we're going to create a list of our reminders and output them into our template.